Joining me now, CJ Werleman. He is a senior contributor for InsideArabia.com. He's also in Melbourne, Australia, so it's 8:40 p.m. Melbourne time, so he's at night, we're in the morning. Hey, CJ, great to have you with us, man, again.
Hey, John, mate, great to be speaking with you again. How are you doing?
Good. So I get up today at 3:30, and I go to InsideArabia.com. I get a cup of coffee, see what's going on, because this is my favorite site. I love this site. You're coming on today to talk about something else. Boom! I see this article pops up. I read it 2 times. I'm like, this is a great piece. I'm going to start here. And the title of it is From Palestine to Kashmir, Black Lives Matter Reignites Anti-Colonial Movements. And you kind of delve into that, starting out by saying that protest against racial injustice in the U.S. has sparked global anti-colonial sentiments and decolonization struggles. And you go on to say it's likely that today's protests will re-energize global support against colonial rule in Palestine, Kashmir, and elsewhere. Great piece, CJ. Great analysis. I never even thought about that. So I just want to get your take on where is this going?
Well, I mean, it's interesting already in the Middle East. Arab observers are referring to the Black Lives Matter protests as the American Spring or the American Intifada. Intifada being the Arabic word to resist or to throw off. So that's how they're looking at it, and it's interesting if you look at. I think it was credited to Mark Twain that he said that history doesn't often repeat, but it doesn't always repeat, but it often rhymes. If you look at the civil rights protests of the 1960s, specifically as they started as sit-in protests against racial segregation in the Deep South in North Carolina, that sparked a global solidarity movement, which then turned into morphed into anti-colonial struggles in Algeria, in Indochina, and Palestine, and the likes. And we're seeing the same thing happen again today with calls for, the protests against racial injustice in the United States are also sparking global anti-colonial movements and decolonization struggles in Palestine, in Kashmir, in East Turkestan, and elsewhere.
When you say anti-colonial movements, put that into as far as what those people that are protesting using the civil unrest in the U.S., the Black Lives Matter movement, okay? Take that and then extrapolate it. So I'm in Pakistan, I'm in Kashmir, I'm in Algiers, I'm in one of these countries. What does that mean? Like if I'm protesting for decolonialization, what does that mean to me? Like what do they want to happen?
Sure. A great question. I mean, so for example, when friends of mine in Kashmir, they look at what's happening in the United States, and they look at black communities, which, the United States allocates, U.S. states and U.S. municipalities allocate a greater proportion of their policing resources to black communities and black neighborhoods. So for somebody who's living in Kashmir, which is the most militarized place on the planet, there are almost 1 million soldiers for 8 million Kashmiris, so more than 1 for every 8 citizens, for a militancy which represents only around about 140 militants. So when Kashmiris have to deal with checkpoints and police harassment and stop and frisk, and are punished for crimes that Indians and the rest of the country would not be, or in India proper, wouldn't be arrested or prosecuted for, they can sympathize with the plights of blacks living in overly policed neighborhoods. So those solidarity movements grow, and we've already seen that with the Palestinian Liberation Movement was one of the first supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement when the BLM movement originated in 2013. Again, they're resisting resisting colonialism. What Israel is doing in the occupied West Bank is a settler colonial movement. What India is doing in Kashmir is a settler colonial movement, where they're trying to change the demography by flooding the area with their demographic type. So in Israel, in the occupied West Bank, it's Israeli settlers. In Kashmir, it's Hindu nationalist settlers. Mm-hmm. And in East Turkestan, which is what China refers to as Xinjiang, China is flooding Xinjiang which was an indigenous Uyghur territory with Han Chinese migrants, and also banning Islam and putting upwards of 3 million Muslims into concentration camps. And that's all for the purpose of changing the realities on the ground. So the realities no longer represent what the indigenous population was all about. It's basically erasure of an ethnic or cultural identity.
So the Chinese Communist government, the CCP, basically, this is like one of the untold stories in like modern history right now, is trying to completely wipe out the Uyghurs, and so they look at Black Lives Matters as a symbol, basically. But the CCP is not like the U.S. You can protest in the U.S. and loot and things of that nature, and you can't do that in the Chinese Communist Party. So you end up dead or in a concentration camp. So how are they dealing with that?
Well, I mean, the Uyghur aren't able to protest. I mean,
right.
There's 12 million Uyghurs living in Xinjiang, 3 million of which are in concentration camps, and the other 9 million basically live in a virtual prison anyway. The virtual prison has been turned into a steel fortress with militarized checkpoints and the most high-tech totalitarian measures the world has ever seen, with iris scans, with GPS tracking. Every Uyghur has their phone and cars tracked by GPS location. They have facial recognition software. Every time they step onto a train or the subway, their movements are tracked through a control center. So, yeah, you're right. They can't protest. And the importance of these global solidarity movements. What eventually brought the apartheid South African regime down in the 1980s was global solidarity movements, which exacted a high economic cost of maintaining a system of apartheid and segregation.
We're with C.J. Werleman, senior contributor, writer for Inside Arabia. Go to InsideArabia.com, my number one source of news and information in the Middle East, and it should be bookmarked for you. You want to go there every day, based right here in Washington, D.C., InsideArabia.com. C.J., let's go to the Palestinian situation. In your piece, you put that you quote a British Black Lives Matter activist of Palestinian heritage told another publication, the Middle East Monitor. He said, Palestinians go through the same struggle, so I understand the pain, and there's nothing more painful than when it's happening, and no one is talking about it, and no one is doing anything about it. But the reality is, if you live in America, you have all these freedoms, and part of the freedom is to do what they've done that you just don't have. Like, you can't do this in Palestine because you've got basically two entities. So if you're a Palestinian and you're looking for inspiration from Black Lives Matter, what is your goal?
Well, I mean, the goal of every Palestinian is to have the international community pressure Israel to abide by international law, which means end its illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories and end its colonial project in the occupied territories, specifically East Jerusalem and the West Bank. As it stands at the moment, there are 800,000 illegal settlers that live in the occupied West Bank, and there's about half that number that live in East Jerusalem. And in Gaza is basically turned into the world's largest open-air concentration camp. So the Palestinians that live in the West Bank, they cannot move without having to navigate Israeli military checkpoints. So when Palestinians in the West, the Israelis use Palestinians in the West Bank as cheap labor, for example. And so when the Palestinians have to cross the apartheid barrier into Israel proper, they often have to stand in line for 6 to 8 hours every morning. So if they start at 9 a.m. within 1967 border Israel, they get up at 1 a.m. in the morning and stand in a queue for the next 6 to 7 hours until Israel military lets them through. This is a people that lives under constant surveillance, constant harassment by effectively what is a foreign occupation force. While Palestinians who have been dispersed all throughout the Middle East because of Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign are not allowed back into Palestine. Meanwhile, in the Palestinian territories, you have Jewish kids from Brooklyn walking around the area with AR-15s and AK-47s, raining hell on the indigenous population. So when Palestinians look at the Black Lives Matter movement, they see something which is representing a global struggle against settler colonialism, against apartheid, against oppression, against racism.
How would you compare this to the Arab Spring?
Well, the difference is with the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring, they were specifically, resisting against brutal authoritarian regimes. And there's a yearning for democracy in the Middle East. There is no doubt about that. But these authoritarian regimes, which have enjoyed the patronage of, European powers, Britain, France, and the United States in particular, we have helped destroy every level of civil and political life in these countries. So the only political groups which are organized are Islamist groups, so political Islamic groups. So when they want democracy and there's an opportunity for democracy, only political Islamic groups there are there to organize. But they want what we all want. People in the Middle East, what we want. They want freedom to live their lives freedom from want and fear. Nothing else. They don't want to live under ISIS. They don't want to live under, Wahhabi interpretations of Islam. They don't want to. They want to be able to. Their kids go to school, to live a free life. And, just basic things we want, and that's what they were protesting against in 2011 and 2012. And sadly, we abandoned them at their hour of need.
With us is C.J. Werleman. He is a senior contributor with Inside Arabia. Go to InsideArabia.com. C.J. also coming to us live from Melbourne, Australia. Shed light on the Kashmir situation, which has gone with COVID-19 and everything. It's just not in the news. It's under everybody's radar screen. I know there's a lot of people concerned about it. I've had various former ambassadors on my show talking about what is going on there. Shed light right now on how Kashmir is reacting to Black Lives Matter and what the situation is there.
I mean, the situation in Kashmir is very dire, extremely dire. I mean, not only Kashmiris standing on the precipice of what's promising to be a human rights catastrophe, but if nuclear war is ever to occur within our current international system, it won't be between the North Korea and the United States. It'll be between India and Pakistan, and it'll be over Kashmir. The international community has abandoned Kashmir. The Indian government under the Narendra Modi regime, a Hindu nationalist regime, which has adopted its ideology actually from the Nazi Party in Germany, they see this as their moment, with the international community distracted by the COVID-19 pandemic, as their moment to mirror what Israel has done in the Palestinian territories, to mirror what China is doing in Xinjiang or East Turkestan right now, and that is to turn Kashmir into a Hindu settler colonial project. And they started this in May of last year by stripping away Kashmir's semi-autonomous status. And just recently, they've passed new domicile laws, which enables non-Kashmiri locals to acquire property, start businesses, or seek employment in the territory. And this is the first step to what will eventually become the strategy of demographic flooding in the area. You'll see more and more Hindus moving into what is Kashmiri indigenous land, stealing property, setting up businesses, basically putting the 8 million indigenous Kashmiris in a situation, making life so untenable and so unbearable that they'll have no other choice but to self-deport, like the Palestinians were forced to in 1948 and then again in 1967. And Kashmir will be swallowed whole by India. Now, how Pakistan responds to that is like they'll see that as an immediate threat. They see the Indian military escalating its activities in the region. India has violated the ceasefire 1,100 times already in the year 2020, since January 1st. And at the same time, you've got China pressing against India's borders. So at this moment, the world is distracted. You have three nuclear-armed powers basically standing off in a military confrontation over a very, very small piece of land at the base of the Himalayas.
And so the goal of the Modi government is to, as you said, flood the zone or colonialize, if you will, using that term from a while back, colonialize Kashmir by flooding it with Indian Hindus. But what incentive do they give? I mean, if I'm a Hindu living in India, why would I go there? Like, what incentive to get all these Indians to go there, start businesses, get jobs, buy land? What's the incentive to get them there? Like, if I live in India and I'm a Hindu, why would I want to go there?
But the same reason why Jewish settlers in Israel are enticed to move to or relocate or migrate to the occupied West Bank. You get to move overcrowded cities, over expensive cities, and you get to move to an area or terrain which is mostly rural, big wide spaces. You get to have a big home behind fortified security compounds. Fresh air, clean space. It's good living. And that's that's the same kind of enticement that India or New Delhi will offer Indians, an opportunity for middle class and upper middle class Indians to acquire property on the cheap. And that's good living if you're used to living in the overcrowded, cramped neighborhoods of Mumbai or New Delhi. Move to Kashmir where the rivers flow, farmyards are aplenty, and the air is clean.
When are you going to write a new book, CJ?
I don't have time for that these days.
CJ Werleman, let me thank you for being with us. CJ Werleman, thanks for being with us. Go to InsideArabia.com. Read CJ Werleman, InsideArabia.com. Follow him on Twitter it's at CJ Werleman, right?
Yep, that's it.
At CJ Werleman. Got to put the E after the Werleman, WERLEMAN, CJ Werleman, at CJ Werleman. Hey, CJ, thank you.